So today we have with us Aditi Krishnakumar. She's from the PGP 2007 batch and she's received the Young Alumni Achievers Award in the Arts, Entertainment and Sports category. Aditi is a writer, mathematician and a private consultant. She's written 7 books including Codex, The Lost Treasure of the Indus, which won the Scholastic Asian Book Award and was nominated for the Singapore Book Award. She's also been nominated for Asian Scientist Writing Prize, the Binod Kanoria Award for Children's Literature and Peekaboo Children's Literature Festival Award. Welcome Aditi to the campus after a long time.
Thank you, it's lovely to be back here.
How does it feel to be recognized by IIMA for this award?
It is an incredible feeling. I think, no matter how many years you've been away and how far you've been, there's always something special about being recognized by the alma mater. And of course, the other thing is that as a writer, you don't necessarily get a whole lot of other signs that you're doing well, external signs. So it's great to have this.
And you've successfully transitioned from a management graduate to an acclaimed author. So what interested you in pursuing writing?
I think I was always interested in writing. Unfortunately, it's the thing that doesn't pay the bills. And, that's one of the areas where I think IIMA also gives you a lot of push because there were plenty of professors while I was here and after who believe in, making sure that you pursue your passions in addition to everything else you do. So I had a lot of encouragement from them, encouragement from my family to make it work, to keep trying. So I think that's the thing. It's not a question of, not initially at least, of that you completely give up on one thing and do the other thing, but you just kind of keep doing what you love and making time for the things you love. And I think that's the important thing.
So were you writing when you were in IIMA?
I was. I didn't publish much at that time, but we did. I think one of the people 2 years my senior was running sort of an online magazine, so I wrote a bit for that. And there were the yearbooks, and then I was involved, of course, with LSD and with IIMA. So there are always a lot of opportunities on campus. I think whatever your interest is, to follow that and to be with other people who are also interested in that.
And the professors knew that, there is this girl who's interested in
writing.
They knew,
in fact, I think when we'd come back for our 10-year reunion, Professor D'Souza, he taught me E1, I think, Economics 1. And he spoke to one of my classmates, and she told me about it later. He said, oh, there was this girl in your class who was always really interested in writing. What happened to her? So I think it's just... It's a sign of how close-knit the community is also, that the professors kind of know you outside of, just classes and exams and things like that. They know what you're interested in. Professor Monipalli, Professor Handa, they were all very encouraging about it while I was a student and afterwards.
Wow. And as a mathematician, you've co-authored 3 papers in the graph theory published in highly regarded journals. So what fascinates you about maths?
It's something I say a lot, and people tend to think it's odd, but really I feel like literature and maths are kind of the same thing.
Wow.
With both of them, you are trying to understand the world around you. With literature, you're usually trying to understand people, and with maths, you're trying to understand the nature of reality. But it's just a question of wanting to have answers. What happens? Why does it happen? And you approach it in different ways, using different methods, but they are both the same thing, and they come from a place of, interest, of curiosity, of wanting to know why things happen.
Wow. And you've studied maths, physics, computer science, law, management, and then are now working in corporate communication and quantitative finance. So how do you manage all these multiple interests and strands?
So there are 2 things. I think one thing is that you don't necessarily, do everything in equal amount all the time. So let's say in a 2 or 3 year period, you have studied some degree and then you've been working at a job and then you've written a book and you may have done something else. But that doesn't mean that, 25% of your waking hours every day, you were able to devote to each of those things. So at any given time, it's natural, like even in a job, there are times when, you're really busy and you're working late hours, you're getting home at 10 o'clock, and then there are times when it's relaxed and you go home early. And the same thing happens with books. There's a stage when you're writing or editing madly, and then there's a stage when you take a bit of a backseat and you're focused more on sales and everything. So at any point, I think it's just a question of knowing what it is that needs to be a priority then, and being able to shift priorities, as through the months, through the weeks. And I think that's something that, again, IIMA really teaches you, because while you're here, there are so many things for students to do other than academics. There's so much going on always, and just being able to know what needs to take priority and needs to take up most of your time at any, on any given day, and being able to make that happen is how you keep that balance.
And maths, did you study it in the university? How did you?
Yes, I did maths as an undergraduate, and in fact, part of my motivation as a student at IIMA was that I wanted to do quant finance and things related to maths, and I did that kind of work for quite a while. I did financial risk management, structured products, and all those sorts of things. So it is something I really enjoy. I think, it's one of those things, maths just kind of, it makes sense and it always behaves, so it's fun.
Right. And can you share the challenges that you faced when you wanted to establish yourself as a writer?
So there are a couple of things. One thing, especially when I first started writing, is that it was hard to find a publisher. I think perhaps that's less of a challenge now, because there are a lot more opportunities, a lot more independent publishing houses. And of course, there's, self-publishing and Kindle Direct Publishing. So actually getting a book out there is possible for everyone. But then the next thing becomes sort of, again, at that time, so with my first book, it was with a smaller publisher. So then there was the question of distribution. Are we able to get the books to all the stores? I'm saying this knowing that, for management students, this is definitely something that is that's going to be important, because we study all that, logistics and operations and all those kinds of things. So when you're self-publishing or publishing perhaps with a smaller indie publisher, these are questions that become big, like how are you doing all this stuff? And larger publishers, of course, will have a great distribution network, traditional publishers, but both ways, it is then a question of how do you get the book out to people? Because again, now there are, I forget the statistic, but there's something about, how many new books are published on Amazon every day, and it's some completely insane number. So when there's so much to choose from and so many different, it works both ways. So many more people are reading and have access through, online stores. And earlier, like if you wanted a book, you had to go to the bookstore, and then if they didn't have it, you would have to go to another bookstore and wait for them to order it. People have access, which is great, but at the same time, there are just so many choices that, it becomes a question of how do you make sure people know about your book. And for me, honestly, despite IIMA and everything, I was not great at marketing. I've tried to become better, but, there's still a long way ahead. But that is still one of my biggest challenges, just how do you make sure that people know that this book exists and, you could read it, you could try it.
And you started by writing for children, right?
So not exactly. My first book was for adults. After that, well, I think the other thing that happened is I kind of just wrote a book for children, and then I was working with a couple of really great editors, Daphne Lee at Scholastic Asia and Shaini Basu in India with Duckbill, which is now part of Penguin. And I think with writing a book, the editor is just such an important part of the process that once you kind of find an editor you like working with, you just want to keep working with them.
Yeah. Interesting. And I think you've spoken about how IMA has shaped your experience and your worldview and your approach to problem solving, but can you elaborate more on how it has?
Absolutely. So, a couple of things happened. Like when I started at IIMA, I was at that point, I was 20, I think. I was very young, very nervous. I was not at all sure that, this was the right path, because at that age, you're not sure. You're just so full of doubt. But I think a couple of things happened. One thing is that I met a lot of people, friends, classmates, professors who sort of, who are interested in a lot of different things and who did them, and that sort of helps you realize that, you're not studying anything. At no point are you closing a door. That belief that at any point, if you say, I am interested in this and I want to do this, and knowing that you can do that, like, you can always try to do a thing and get better at it. So that was great. And of course, I made great friends who have always been very supportive and encouraging, and they don't hesitate to tell me when they think I'm really bad at marketing. So there is that. And the other thing is, it was definitely true for me, it may be true for a lot of other people, is that that there was a much higher intake of freshers, I think, at that time. So you tended to come here straight out of college. In my case, I'd been living at home and going to college. So this is the first time you're really on your own and you're being an adult. And I think those first few years when you're on your own kind of shape the kind of adult that you're going to be. And if that's at a place like IMA, it just is a place that makes you believe that anything is possible. So there is that.
And what advice would you give to somebody who's interested in pursuing, say, writing or any other creative pursuit?
I would say, of course, go for it. The thing is, I would not want to give the sort of advice that goes like, drop everything and write books or give up and do a full-time job, because I think that is very dependent on people's circumstances, on what they want out of life and what responsibilities they have, what they're able to do at any given time. But what I would say is, don't ever believe that you can't do it or you're being held back from doing it. There may be a time, a year or two, because as I said earlier, it's not like you can devote 25% of every day to each of the things you like. So it's happened for me. There was a time, in fact, White Lotus, my latest book, I wrote that after a year and a half of literally not having the time to write anything. So that can happen. Life might take over. You might get incredibly busy. But there'll always, the wheel turns, the clock moves on, all that kind of stuff. So you'll always ultimately have the bandwidth to do the things you want to do. And the other thing that happens is, we spoke about growing up when you come here, and for all creative pursuits, that's something that I learned when I first came here. One thing is sort of the craft, like learning the technical details of dance or knowing how to different forms of poetry or singing. So that's one part of it. The other part is, the maturity and life experience that really puts depth into any creative work. So even when you're dealing with the hard parts of life, you are gaining that maturity that is then going to make your next creative work even better. And I think that's something important to remember.
Yeah. Not lose yourself while
Not lose yourself, yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Aditi, for spending time with us.
Thank
and
you
all the
so
best.
much for having me. It's lovely to be back on campus.
Thanks.